Hi there, everyone, and welcome to our program today, Introductions for ChatGPT, Claude 4.1, and Gemini, the next round. Seems like you can't blink without getting caught behind the eight ball on what's going on with AI. Anyway, my name is Dean Serwin. I am the section chair for the Law Practice Management section here at the Beverly Hills Bar. I'm going to handle this introduction and then hand it off to Stephen Smith. Before I introduce Stephen, let me tell you a little bit about what we do at the BHBA and why it's so wonderful. You're seeing things pop up in the chat here about our CLE library. It is outstanding. I used to get cornered by all these emails or faxes and letters in the good old days when it was time for me to do my MCLE, and I'd realize I hadn't done enough, and I'd order these video cassettes. That's how long ago that is. I'm older. And then DVDs, and then links to boring, silly, outdated programs. Instead, what we have with the BHBA is this wonderful on-demand service that's kind of like almost a YouTube for MCLE, and new, up-to-date, dynamic issues like the one today. If there's a new case that comes down, we've got a program up about it, usually within a week. And so you can go in there, watch these, you get participatory credit for them, you can get the materials, and best of all, once you've watched it, it goes into a locker. So when it comes time for you to do your MCLE compliance, it's a couple of clicks. Last time I did it, it took me 2 minutes. It's a wonderful system, and this fantastic, I know, dynamic program we're going to have for you today will be up there within 24 hours. So if you liked it and you want to go back and watch it again, you can. You can let your friends know about it. Please do. We have, oh gosh, I don't know, 1 to 3 of these a day. So we have hundreds, if not thousands, of these programs up there. So anyway, let's get on to telling you about this one. Stephen Smith is the CEO of Intelligence by Intent. He's a leading AI trainer and implementation coach specializing in practical applications and use cases for professional service firms. He translates complex AI capabilities into actionable business strategies that deliver measurable results. With over 15 years as a C-level executive and former CFO himself, he brings a unique perspective to AI training, focusing on applications that impact revenue growth, operational efficiency, and strategic decision-making. His approach emphasizes hands-on learning with real-world use cases, not theoretical concepts, which I appreciate greatly because it's wonderful to wax on about what could happen, far more interesting and useful to hear what does happen and how to do it for myself. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Stephen, and thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Dean. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And it is delightful to be back here. I presented, I believe, last March to the Beverly Hills Bar Association. So I'm glad to be back and give you an update about what is happening. So as you can tell from the title, I'm going to focus on some of the newer tools that are out there. ChatGPT 5, the new Claude 4.1, the latest updates on Gemini, and the other advances that are happening out there. So I'm just moving a little chat window out of the way there. Okay. And so with that, let me just jump in just to give you a little bit more background and context about who I am. So as Dean said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've got 30 years of experience in technology, strategy, and operations. I'm a Wharton MBA. I was a CFO and an SVP at a bunch of different tech firms. And the last 3.5 years or so, I've really just been working with primarily law firms, but also a couple of valuation firms and accounting firms around how you actually productively use AI on a day-to-day basis. So today is an update to the last presentation I gave. And I would love this to be interactive. So if there are questions throughout this, please add them in the chat. I'll ask Rin to, please let me know. Actually, here, I'll move the chat window over there so I can see it. But if I don't see a question, please interrupt, ask me. I would love to make this more interactive so that it's not me just talking to you for an hour. So I like to start with this. So Scott Clopert is a very good friend of mine, and this was one of his quotes from about a year ago. So Scott was one of the early adopters in using AI, and he said to me, he said, "Look, he's like, it is so essential to every activity that I do all day long. The only way I'd stop using it is if you pry it from my cold dead hands." And as I've worked with more lawyers, with more organizations, that is the sentiment that I get from everybody. In fact, I use it day in and day out in everything that I do, and I use all the tools. I use ChatGPT 5, I use Claude, I use Gemini, I will occasionally use Grok and Perplexity. So if you have questions about any of those tools as we go through this today, as I said, please jump in and interrupt. So I'm going to talk about four things today, really. The first thing is, and this is really important, is privacy updates. One of the things that is incredibly important is that we use these tools to make sure that all the client data that we put in these tools is safe and secure. What you don't want to be doing is using, consumer versions of these tools that you have not put the right privacy and security on. You should ideally be using, the businesses slash teams or enterprise versions for the highest levels of security. And the reason I say this is so important is a year ago, we talked about Claude. Claude has been one of the best tools out there from a privacy standpoint. In fact, they started focusing on privacy. They said, look, we will never train on your data. All of your things are private. You can put in anything in here you want, medical information, tax information, things like that. They have just flipped their privacy stance. And so the reason I wanted to put this up front is I know a lot of organizations, a lot of firms use Claude because of the privacy and security. So I encourage you to go back into Claude. You can opt out of it, right? So they've got a little toggle when you go in there now that says, hey, we've changed our privacy and security, right? There's a little toggle in there that says, click this to make sure that your data is not trained on. So it goes into effect on September 28th. So please go in there before then if you are a Claude user. I did put a link here to an article I wrote about a week ago on this exact topic. So again, this is brand new, kind of breaking news. Please go in and change that because for Claude, this is a complete change of pace from where they were. Now, I know a lot of people use different tools that are out there. And so I will talk about all these really, really briefly. So ChatGPT, and again, so this is the consumer version of the tools. I know a lot of organizations and a lot of small, solo people like to use the consumer tools, which I do too at a certain level, and I understand it. So you should just know that, ChatGPT by default opts you into training on your data, right? So you have to go opt out. So I put the instructions on these pages. So if you're using these tools, you can actually go in and look and make sure you opt out of that data. Anthropic, which is Claude, didn't used to train on your data. They do now. So again, go make that change in there. If you're using Gemini, which is truly an incredible model, and we'll talk about some of the other things that Gemini can do right now. If you're using a true consumer account, it opts you in and you really can't turn out of training. So I tell everyone that's using Gemini, please at least use a business account, even a one-person business account, because then you can have the option to not have your data trained on. Grok also opts you into training by default. You can opt out, and same thing on Perplexity. So again, if you're using any of the consumer grade tools, and these are typically the $20 a month versions of these tools, you have to make sure you opt out of training because by default, they all start it now. So I put in two more pages here. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I want you to have these as part of the backup content in the presentation. But I actually laid out most of these organizations have teams and enterprise versions. So teams are typically, anywhere from 2 or 5 to, a couple of hundred people. And enterprise versions are obviously, for the largest organizations, they're the biggest, most secure, most complex, set of privacy and security tools that you can put on there. So again, really good information on here. If you use any of those services on the business side or on the enterprise side, by default, they don't train on your data. So again, that's why I tell people to go do that. And I'll show you a real-time example right now. So I'm in Gemini. I was actually playing with that image. And so you'll see if I just type something, hello Gemini, something really simple here, Gemini, right? What you'll see on the bottom, all it says down here is Gemini can make mistakes, right? I'm actually using here, this is my personal version of this. If I switch over and go to my workspace account, right, and I go do the same thing here, I'll type hello Gemini. what you'll see on the bottom is a message that, your chats are not used to train our data, right? So it's really important. They're very clear. If you're using a consumer grade version, and again, this is Gemini specific of that, your data can be trained on. So again, it's an amazing tool. It is super powerful. I just want you all to be aware of that as we go forward. So as I said, there's more in here on this, but I really want to get to the heart of the presentation where it's a lot more fun. So let me start by talking about what's new, because we saw a lot of really, really great changes this year, a lot of new capabilities. I'm going to show you over the course of the next, hour or so, a lot of great new use cases, a lot of new capabilities. And again, if there are interesting things that you want to see, let me know. I'm starting with a couple of definitions, and this is one of the most important ones. Is there's something called a context window. So if you go use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, think of a context window is the short-term memory that you can have a conversation with, right? And the reason I bring this up is I will show you in a minute that when you're using some of the consumer versions of these tools, the chat window you have is actually much smaller than if you go subscribe to professional editions. So, as an attorney, you can put in a lot more exhibits, a lot more content. You can have much more reasoned and lengthy discussions with the AI about the content and what you're trying to do. So just think of it as, again, the memory that a person has, the more you put in, they're going to start forgetting things at the beginning if you overwhelm their memory. So it really, as you'll see, some of these have relatively short, memory versions. So you really want to make sure you're using a version that has a lot. And Gemini, by the way, has got the biggest, and we'll talk about the exact numbers in a minute. The biggest change this year was the movement from reasoning to not, sorry, from non-reasoning models to reasoning models. So if you were a big user of ChatGPT over the last year and you were using 4.0, which the vast majority of people were, right, that is a non-reasoning model. It was basically saying, I'm going to go look at whatever data that I've been trained on and try and give you the best answer from that data. A reasoning model, on the other hand, takes your input, it takes what it's been trained on, it will do real-time web searches, it will actually go, enable and call different tools to process data and try and come up with the best answer. In fact, it will often go through, 5, 10, 20, 50 different answers to give you the best possible answer to your question. And what you'll see when we go through these demos is it does take a lot longer to get the answers, but once you start using reasoning models, I think you will never go back to using the non-reasoning models because the quality of the answer is so much better. It is so far superior. In fact, I didn't put the chart in here this time, but the IQ, because they can actually measure these models on the Mensa tests and things like that. The IQ of the ChatGPT 5 is, I think it's like 135 IQ, right? So these models have gotten really, really good, whereas ChatGPT 4.0 was around 100. So again, you'll see Gemini is a 2.5 Pro is a reasoning model. Claude 4.1 is a reasoning model. They've all moved in that direction, and you'll see that they take a little bit longer to answer, but you get much better answers. And the last thing I want to mention here are these things called agents. If you read anything about AI, you know that you can't, go a day without seeing people talk about, hey, we've got a new agent that does this, we have an agent that does that, or we have, agentic capabilities. Think of an agent as basically, it's a tool built around an AI that works autonomously for you to solve a problem, right? And so one of the examples we'll do live is a deep research issue. Deep research is an agent. You give it instructions, it will go off and it will go run that task for you. I will show you a live example of another one. Agents now can control your browser. They can go do research. They can fill out web forms. They can do all sorts of things. They can take input from an email and a spreadsheet and combine things, right? So you can set these things up. They'll go off and run and do things for you. So if you have tasks that you repeat on a frequent basis, you can set up agents now to go do these things. We're not going to go deep in this session today around that, but I just wanted you to be aware. So these are the only terms I wanted to define up front, but I wanted you to see these as we went through. So let's talk about OpenAI, right? ChatGPT 5 was the big launch of the summer. It launched just about a month ago. They definitely had some hiccups in the beginning. They have straightened those out. It is an absolutely unbelievable tool. It is really incredible, especially when you use the thinking model and the pro model. So if you go into ChatGPT now, right, this is their default. They call it the one system model. So I will just switch to the ChatGPT screen for a second. If you do a new chat, which you'll see up here is you just see ChatGPT 5, right? This is basically their auto model. So They were trying to simplify it because in the past, if you remember, they had, 4.0, O 04 mini low, O 04 mini high. They had O 03, they had O 03 Pro, they had O 01 Pro, right? I mean, I can see some of the legacy models here. They had a lot of choices. They try to make it really, really simple for most users just by saying, look, if you leave it on auto, it will figure out whether it can do a quick web search to answer your question or if it uses reasoning. I will tell you, as someone who lives and breathes in these tools all day long, I just start with the thinking model, right? And I would encourage you, if you use ChatGPT, to start using the thinking model to try it out. And I'll show you the differences as we go through here. I also use the Pro model a lot for incredibly advanced research. And I've worked with a bunch of attorneys on very, very advanced cases. And again, using the Pro model gives it its absolute best thinking. You can put in a tremendous amount of context and get absolutely brilliant answers. And I'll show you some examples of that. But they made this to say, hey, we're trying to be simpler. They have continued to evolve their deep research tool, right? As I said, that's an agentic web searcher. So you can create an incredibly detailed query for it to go off and do deep research on. It will go off and it will spend anywhere from, 5 to 30 minutes to go search the web, clarify the question, do the research, cite the sources, verify all the facts that are in there, and get you the most robust, best answer that it can as it does that. They've also incorporated web search, right? So if you don't want to go to Google, you can go into ChatGPT and do really simple questions, and it will actually go search the web real time for you as well. They have continued to evolve projects in Canvas and memory, and we'll talk about those things. One of the beautiful things now about projects is you can go create a project. In fact, I have one here that I was doing for the presentation today where I ran a bunch of the prompts through here as an example. So let's say that you create a project on a particular client and you want to have a string of chats about that client. You can upload a ton of documents about that client. You can have all of your conversations. And as they've added memory now, within this particular project, the chats will have an understanding of the other chats that you've had, right? So this is something that's relatively new for ChatGPT. They're adding memory, and you can have simply within project memories. So if I have a chat about one thing, it can actually reference things that I've done in earlier chats in that project. So for client work, that is a super powerful use case. I'll show you a Canvas again in a minute. Again, a super powerful tool. I'll give you an example of agent mode. So this is one where you can basically have ChatGPT go off and act as an independent agent. You can give it instructions to go search the web, to go find content, to fill out forms, to go do research, to bring it all together. It will act autonomously for you. So we're not going to run a full session today because I find that they often take a tremendous amount of time to go run. But just know that this is the mode that they're evolving to, where they can automate all these different things. Then the last thing around OpenAI that they launched this summer was they've introduced a bunch of business connections, right? So they can connect to if you are a Microsoft shop and you use SharePoint or OneDrive, right? They can connect to that. They can now connect to your Google Drive if you are a Google shop. They can connect to Box and a bunch of other things. So they actually will allow you to use deep research and other questions against all those very secure business tools now. So you can actually bring, whatever knowledge of the documents you have into these conversations and actually use it in a very safe and secure way. So they are really making ChatGPT a very business friendly tool. So as I said here, GPT-5 is like having two brains in one. But this is where I wanted to talk about the token context because this is really important. So if for some reason you are using the free version of ChatGPT, and again, I strongly encourage you not to do that because you really don't have any privacy. You're basically limited to an 8,000 token conversation, which is about 12 pages of text. If you're just using the $20 a month version, right, it's 32,000 tokens per conversation, which is about 48 pages. So if you load in a couple of reasonably long documents, you're going to run out of context. And so what's going to happen is it's going to forget the beginning of your conversations or the documents you've uploaded. So I encourage you to go get, a business subscription, a pro subscription, because obviously you can have much longer conversations now, right? 96,000 words, 192 pages. Or if you use the API, you can get even longer access after that. But again, this is something that most people don't realize, and they don't realize that when you're drafting content and doing things, if you have a relatively small context window, it's going to get cut off when you do things in the beginning. So I'll show you a couple of things in the beginning here, just in terms of the ability to do like real-time web search and things like that. Is I'm going to grab some text here, and I'm just going to turn off the air conditioning in my house because it's a little bit cold in here. But you can actually say, look, I want to go do a quick web search. I'm going to just grab this content here and I'm going to go over to ChatGPT. I'm going to leave it on auto and let's say new. And I'm also going to tell it to actually just do more here and do web search, right? So you can basically tell it, go look for 2020, 2024, 2025, your prenuptial agreement updates on this content. And it's going to basically say, as you can see here, it's going to go search the web right now. And as you'll see, you get a very, very fast answer, right? And I've got citations in here as well, but it is very, very fast because it was not using a thinking model. If you then want to basically say, all right, I want you to think a little bit more about this, right? I want you to summarize the signal from those articles into a 150-word thesis. So I'm going to just grab this. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to switch this now to the thinking model. And I'm going to go ahead and run this query. I'm going to turn off web search because I don't need to do that again. And I'm going to say go. And what you'll see here is now it says thinking, right? And so this is an area where you will see that, this may take, 10 seconds, it may take a minute to actually go through and figure out based on the research that it did, how to answer my question, right? So you can see it's going to go through some different steps. I'm going to step away and come back to it for a second, just so I can keep talking about what's new in here and what we've got, because there's some really interesting things. And then I won't do the second one here, but I could say, I could tell it, think hard about this. And if you use that phrase, it will actually do its deepest level of thinking. And it actually has multiple levels of thinking within ChatGPT. So I could say, hey, using the articles above, write a 1-paragraph thesis on, relocation case postures in LA, give me 5 risks ranked, and, fact 3 gaps that we have to close, things like that. So they've added, like I said, some really, really powerful new tools. As I said, as you go through reasoning, yeah, it's still working on it, you're going to see it really give you very, very detailed answers. So I would encourage you to primarily use that unless you're simply asking a question that it's likely been trained on that it can just give you a quick answer to. So as I said earlier, deep research launched early this year, and I know a lot of people haven't tried it. It is one of the most powerful tools out there, right? It will basically go off and you can give it a very, very detailed prompt with lots of different examples, a lot of different things, and say, go research this topic for me. What we'll come back with is an unbelievably detailed citation-rich document to answer your question. And so if I show you this example, right? So I want to, understand the treatment of stock-based compensation of RSUs and PSUs and spousal and child support. So I can tell it, hey, this is my scope and jurisdiction. Here are the core questions I care about, right? When do courts treat, vested versus unvested RSUs and bonuses as income for support? What are the standards for imputing income, right? Use and structure the percentage, of this order. What are the evidentiary showings? Look at primarily most recent case studies, right? And then what I want is a deliverable, 150-word thesis, the 5 strongest counter arguments, all these different things. So this is a single query that I'm going to go launch. And you'll see here, by the way, so this was the thinking. So it thought for 2 minutes and 9 seconds from that prior one to go give me this last topic here. And if I go search here on stock-based compensation, right, that deep research query that I was running earlier, and I'm going to actually just go back to the very top of this, because what you'll see here is I put in here, that I want to go do deep research on this topic. And one of the things that's great about ChatGPT's deep research, and Gemini does this too, is it will say, hey, this is a very well detailed and scope request. Before I begin the research, can you confirm these things that I want to know just to make sure I'm focused on the right things, right? So it's saying, am I looking for differences in how courts treat RSUs versus PSUs versus options? Should I include analysis of temporary versus permanent support? So it's trying to clarify, what do I really want to get the best answer? And so I answered those questions for it. And it went off. It says, I'm going to go think about all these things. So look, it searched for 8 minutes. It went to 18 sources. It did 114 searches. And I'm just going to flip here. I pulled up the actual document it created. So it created, this was the thesis that I asked for, right? Sort of the 150-word thesis up front here. These are the best counter arguments to that thesis. Then it went through and identified all the cases for me, right? So again, this is a super, super powerful tool to use on this stuff. It is incredible. I've worked with lots of organizations. PE firms use it, valuation firms use it. When you want to research an industry, a set of laws, a set of cases, if you're working in a new specialty area, It is a super, super powerful tool to get you up to speed as fast as it can. And the best part is at the end, it will actually give you all of its sources and all of its linked. So again, super, super powerful tool built into ChatGPT. Um, I already talked really briefly about projects. So again, projects is a custom workspace and you can create as many as you want where you can have chats, you can have files, you can have custom instructions. And again, you can actually, because it now has memory, it has the ability to basically have knowledge of the other chats that you have in there, right? So I actually have a number of projects. I have a detailed fact checker project where I've got incredibly detailed instructions and you can see I've got all these different things that are in here. And so you can actually create, again, very, very detailed instructions about what you want it to do. You can upload files, but it becomes contained as a project. So again, if you haven't tried projects and you're working on a single case, it is a great way to put that information in there. Canvas is another powerful tool. So if you've historically used ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, you know that the conversation is just like a long threaded conversation. Well, ChatGPT has a Canvas tool. I'm going to leave this in auto for a second. That I'm going to put on Canvas here, and I'll do something silly and simple, but I'm just going to say, write me a 3-paragraph story about St. Bernards and use the Canvas window. And so when you use Canvas here, what it will do is it will create a very quick story, and you'll see here it's going to open it up into a different interface. And so if you're working on a document, if you're working on a deposition, or a draft memo for something, you can do it in a Canvas window. And the beauty of using Canvas is you can now go in and simply edit certain portions of it, right? Versus having to edit the whole thing. So I'm now in the Canvas window here, and you'll see here you've got some options here. You can suggest edits, right? I can adjust the length, I can do some different things. But what I can really do is I might want to say, you know what? I just want to change this one paragraph, right? Just rewrite, or this one sentence, rewrite this one sentence. So if you've got a 20-page document, right? Historically, if you told ChatGPT to simply rewrite a portion of it, you're going to see it go do everything again and again, right? What you saw here is it left everything else exactly the same and just edited it in that Canvas window, right? And then once you're in the Canvas window, you can then share, right? You can create links and you can do different things to it. You can create, by the way, interactive infographics. You can create charts and dashboards in the Canvas window. It is super, super powerful. I'll show you some examples as we go through here. So agent mode, again, I will fire one off so you can see what it does because it really is cool. But again, agent mode is something that's new. It's exploratory from ChatGPT, where you can actually have it go off and do research, find reports, go to the SEC website, download things, extract information, do anything you want. I'm going to fire off an agent that basically, it's related to that RSU stuff that I was doing earlier, where I want to tell it to go do these things. I want it to go find, 2024, 25, appellate decisions on imputation of income and RSU-based compensation, create a case matrix, issues holding citations, draft a 5-slide outline for hearing prep, but don't download any files. And so if I go fire this off, I'm going to go into agent mode here, and I'm just going to go ahead and say, do this. And what you'll see here is you'll see it's going to say, okay, I'm going to now set up a virtual desktop. So it is literally creating a virtual set of computers that are running in the cloud that are going to go off now and go do this research for me. So I'm not doing any of this. And by the way, if there was a site you wanted to point it to that say you had to log into, you could actually have it log in for you. It could go do those things. So again, super powerful tool. It will go off. It will do all this stuff. You can create presentations. And again, they're pretty rudimentary, I would say, this day. But again, a very powerful tool and use case for doing that. So again, this will go on for 15, 20, 30 minutes. If it gets done by the end, I'll show the results, but I want to keep going to make sure that we can get through the content. I mentioned earlier these business connectors. I won't belabor this, but you can actually, like I said, if you are a Microsoft shop, you can connect it to your SharePoint. You can use deep research and the other tools to access content in there, to pull content out of there, to do things like that. So it is really great. You can use SharePoint, Box. It can read your email and Outlook. It can connect to Teams. It can connect to HubSpot. It has a lot of great different things. So that's a quick summary of what's in GPT-5. And again, it is super, super powerful. Actually, the one thing I will show you is, let me just duplicate this tab here. And if you are using ChatGPT 5 Pro mode, I've been running a big thing to overhaul my website. And what you'll see here is I put in a very long prompt here and a couple of PDFs, and I said, go off and do a bunch of research, right? So when you do pro mode, it will go think for a long time, right? So in this case, it thought for 8 minutes. It came back with a very specific set of recommendations and a bunch of issues. And then you can keep going, right? And this is their deepest type of thinking. You can have it create content and do things for me. I mean, this is an incredible amount of output from a single prompt, right? And then I actually took additional content from from Claude and from Gemini and added all the stuff in here and said, now consolidate their best thinking and your best thinking, right? So, thought again, hey, I've incorporated this stuff into here. So again, super powerful use case. I use Pro several times a day. It is their single most powerful model. And if you're integrating a lot of different data, it is unbelievably powerful. So not too many updates on the Claude side. They did launch in August 2025 a big update to their Claude Opus 4.1 model. So the one thing I will say about Claude, it is absolutely fantastic at creating beautiful visualizations and infographics, or if you've got a lot of financial data on a case and you want to have it consolidated and like create insights and create charts, all the tools can do it, but you'll get the most beautiful output from Claude if you're doing that, right? They have really stepped up their game. I'll just see if I have any here that I can look at really quickly. I don't know that I had any visualizations set up. That was a video one. I don't see any. I was just looking to see if I had a quick, simple one. Oh, I was doing an interactive chart around temperature change, right? So I was saying, hey, go model out global temperature changes, show me what this looks like, can you automate it, right? So again, through simple prompting, you can create really, really good interactive charts and graphs in Claude. You can do similar things in ChatGPT and Gemini. It's just not as good. And then you can actually publish these to the web. You can download them as images, things like that. But they have continued to update their reasoning. They have historically been one of the absolute best writers out there. Uh, Most of the attorneys that I know actually work with Claude because Claude's writing capabilities are absolutely fabulous. They also have a Claude research capability as well, just like ChatGPT and Gemini does. But that's been their big update for the year. So Google introduced a couple of things that I want to highlight here, some things that are interesting. So back in April, they launched their Gemini 2.5 Pro model. That is their flagship multimodal model. The thing that is different about Gemini versus ChatGPT or Claude is really two things. One is this multimodal, and what that means is it natively understands audio and video from the ground up. So if you have a video of a deposition, if you have an audio file of something, and you want a transcript, or if you want to understand the sentiment of what people are saying, Gemini can go get that for you. In fact, I'll show you because I'll bounce back to it later. But I pulled in a video earlier. I grabbed this 20-minute, 21-minute video summary, off of YouTube. It was a lawyer being deposed, and I said, "Hey, just give me a detailed analysis of this video." Right. So it went through, and it created. Here, I'll make the text a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. Right. A summary of what's in this video. So the nice thing is, like I said, Gemini, it doesn't just read the text of the video, it natively understands what's going on there. And the best way I can showcase this is Gemini has another tool called AI Studio. And it is without a doubt one of the most powerful tools out there if you know how to use it. And you have to set it up correctly so that it doesn't train on your data. But it lets you access their most powerful models and do a lot of tweaking on the models. So I uploaded that same video, which by the way was, as you can see here, 386,000 tokens. So, ChatGPT's limit is 128,000, Claude's is 200,000. So even if it took native video, it couldn't actually take this video. But what you'll see here is I asked it to explain the range of emotions shown in this video. Does this deposed attorney ever get mad, flustered, or angry? If so, tell me when and give me a timestamp. So it went through and thought about it, and it says, yep, in fact, here's when the attorney got flustered and agitated, and it gave me a timestamp. It says, here's what he was saying, here's what was going on, and here's when there's clear anger. So I've worked with a number of attorneys on, when they have, videos of kids or other things they're trying to figure out, were they sad, or when did they get happy, or when did they appear to be deceitful, right? Gemini is the only model, like I said, that understands sentiment, emotion, voice tone. It is incredibly powerful, and I would encourage you to use it. They also introduced something called DeepThink this year, which is basically similar to ChatGPT's 5 Pro, a super advanced deep reasoning model. It's for your hardest problems. Notebook LM, I don't think this was out the last time I presented. It is an incredibly powerful tool. If you have not used Notebook LM, what Notebook LM is, I'm going to jump to this page on it for a second. It lets you create these workbooks where you can dump in up to 300 different sources, and each one of these sources can be quite large. So you can put in a tremendous amount of content about a case. What happens in these workbooks is their AI model only goes when you ask it questions and analyzes the content that's in that workbook. It does not bring in any outside knowledge. It does not do any web searching. It just searches what's in there to give you the best answers. And what made it really unique is its ability to do audio podcasts and now video podcasts and now the ability to create reports. So I'm gonna go into this one, and I could ask it a simple question. I could say, when did this show me when, let's talk to it. Show me when this highlighted a 45% boost in the text. So what it's going to do is I uploaded this single PDF file, right? So it's going to go through and says, hey, here's when it talked about that. And if you hover over it, it actually shows you the text. So if I had 20 or 30 or 40 pages of content in here, it would actually show me all the places related to the question that I'm asking. And if I click on the button, it will actually then open up the exact document. So if you've got 100 different sources in here, it is a great way to answer questions, to find things, to say, hey, did we talk about this? Did we cover what, X or Y? It is super powerful. But the other really great use case is the ability to create audio and video podcasts about the content. So I'm going to play about 20 seconds of this audio podcast from this, called Gemini Unleashed, and I'm just going to hit play here.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's, well, it's everywhere, isn't it? AI. Specifically, generative AI and the really profound impact it's starting to have on businesses.
Absolutely. It's moving so fast.
It really is. And for anyone maybe not fully immersed, Gen AI.
So I'm going to pause there. So what this tool does and what makes it so unique is it takes all the content that you have uploaded into here, again, whether you've got one document or 100 documents, and creates a very, very detailed and insightful podcast about that content to help you learn things. They also recently added a video version of this, and I'll just hit play on this for a second, where what it does is it actually will take whatever content you have, create slides about that content, and also create an audio podcast. And so I'll hit
All
play
right,
for
let's
1
talk
second.
about AI. But let's cut through all the hype, okay? We're not going to talk about
I'll
some
fast forward.
for you, for
So
your
it's, it
team,
has different charts in
brand
here,
new ways to work.
right? It goes through, and they've added a lot of capabilities. So they're allowing you now to create mind maps, to create flashcards, and that right now you can create different reports in Notebook LM, briefing docs. They just announced today that they are announcing a ton of new formats: financial reports, stock reports, strategy briefings. So that's going to be rolling out really soon. But again, it is an incredibly powerful tool. And the one that's nice thing about this is from the first day they launched this tool, they said that everything you put in here is going to be 100% private. So that's fantastic. Um, they have a great deep research tool, just like ChatGPT does. I use it all the time. They also launched a VO3 video tool. I'll show you that for a second. They've also launched something that was making the rounds if you've been following AI, called Nano Banana, which is a flash image, an image generator, but it lets you create very tailored edits. I'll show you a very simple version of what you can do. But they continue to innovate. So one of the things I did is I created a very, very simple video on here. I was saying, hey, let's do a history of the Beverly Hills Bar Association, right? So let me just go grab this. I won't play the whole thing, but I gave it a prompt, and you can actually have it create, incredibly long, detailed videos now. Right? Different scenes, different cuts. You can have character consistency, all the kind of things that you want to do there. And if you want to do Nano Banana, like I said, video editing. This is, as I said, taking the internet by storm right now, because what you can do is you can take an original image and say, go change one thing about this, right? Go change a profile picture, like make this a professional headshot. Or I said, hey, take this crime scene and add notes to the crime scene, right? Based on where the items are. You can change colors, you can change images. So if you're looking at different images from different things, you can actually have it tailor things, change things to see what might look like from a different direction. Here's the fun version of it. So I took my giant St. Bernard who's sleeping to Oregon last week and had a picture. I said, make an image of us riding a bike around Crater Lake, right? Put us in a spaceship, put us in the Opera House in Paris, or make him a chef. It is super, super powerful. In fact, the image that I had at the very beginning today was this one that I did of Scott, where I started with a shot. Scott and I are friends. I took a friend shot. I said, make it a professional headshot. I said, that's not very friendly looking. Make him smile. Then I said, give him a purple tie, and then, give him a charcoal suit. So my point is you can actually do really interesting things with these tools to drive them forward. But what I want to do now is get into some of the more interesting use cases, because this is where the tools get really, really powerful. And I'm going to bounce back and forth across the different tools because I want to show you some of these tools live and how they interact and how they do things differently. So I've got a number of examples in here to highlight different capabilities. And actually, just before I do this, let me just go back to this agent. So, all right, so that agent we fired off to go do that research, right? It worked for 8 minutes. It did it all. We could then download the report. We could get all the content, and we could get all the stuff that it did for us and all the files that it created. So it went off and, again, did that autonomously. So for those of you that saw my first presentation, one of the things that these tools are amazing at is language translation. They have gotten absolutely incredible at language translation, right? And so when I ran this back in March, I said, hey, here's a press release, convert this into French, Spanish, German, and simplified Chinese, right? And sure enough, boom, 30 seconds later, it's converted the entire press release to it. One of the use cases I was working with someone recently is they said, hey, I got a case where I got a note in a divorce case from a prescription in a language I don't know, like I can't read it, can you help me translate it? But all I have is a scan of the image, right? So you can see the image down here, and I'm going to go grab this. I'm just going to go grab this text here, and we'll go off into ChatGPT here, and I'll leave it on auto for a second. I'm going to just go grab this image, right? This doctor's note. And I'm basically just going to go tell it, hey, attaches a doctor's note that's relevant to a divorce case I'm working on. It's from the Philippines. It's a combination of English and Filipino. Give me a detailed translation and description from this image, right? So the thing is, it's going to do two things. One, it's going to process the image. And the second thing is it's actually, translating the languages. So it can read handwriting. It can read even a really chicken scratch handwriting. So again, you can see, it was very, very fast and very good at reading that note and diagnosing that. So if you're working on international cases, if you're doing those kinds of things, these tools are incredibly powerful at doing that. And again, I could actually have it now translated back. I could literally say, can you translate this into German for me, please? Right. And so it'll go off now and it'll just start translating that entire thing into German. Right. So again, if you're working, in international cases, the ability of all these tools, not just ChatGPT, Gemini is amazing at it. Claude is amazing at it. The capabilities are fantastic. Another really good use case is often you might be working with financial statements. In fact, I worked with a large accounting firm here recently in LA, and I was showing how, if you're pulling 10Ks or 10Qs or other financial statements and you want to get information out of it, right? You can actually say, hey, go read everything in this document. And you can see the prompt here, right? You're an AI assistant, go grab this 10K. I want you to go get EBITDA, revenue growth rates, net income, debt to equity ratios, things like that. And if the metric isn't in the document, I want you to calculate it for me. So this is a case where I'm going to run this quickly and I'm going to run it in a thinking model at the same time because I want you to see the difference. So there's going to be a version that's going to run here. I'll go run, actually, I'll make this the thinking one. And, oh shoot, I got to add it again. Hold on. Let me add that file again here. Hopefully we'll add it quickly. We can add that prompt in. And while that's loading, I'm going to go start a new chat over here and do the same thing and say, let's go grab this presentation. All right, hopefully. All right, so this one's loaded. This is the thinking one. And now we'll go run it off on this one. So while this is running, we'll let it go in a second. So it's going to read that document, and now it's going to go extract out all the relevant financial data out of that table, out of this PDF, no matter where it is, right? And so the output when we get it back is going to look something like this on the screen here. And it will, like I said, it will go through, it will calculate EBITDA, it will do revenue growth, all the things that I want to do. It will create notes about it. And, the fast model is really quick at doing this, right? It creates a table, it does these things, it tells me how it's creating the numbers, right? The thinking version here, as you can see, it's still going on. But what I'm going to get in the output is a much more reasoned, much more thoughtful set of answers with a lot more description about the calculations and what it figured out there. So I'll come back to that in a minute so we can keep going because I want to get through the rest of the examples to show you what else is in here. One of the other really, really great things about these tools is their ability to actually understand charts now. And it's often that, you might have a chart from an exhibit or from maybe somebody gave you one as part of a deposition, or you did some discovery and you got charts, and it might be a hard scan chart like this, and you want to have someone understand it or turn that chart into numbers for you, right? These tools are so good at understanding what's in these charts now. So I've got a simple chart here about the streaming music industry. I'm going to use a really simple prompt here and just say, I want you to go analyze this chart for me. I'm not going to use the thinking model because I'm trying to keep this thing moving pretty fast. But if I go grab the streaming chart here, I'm going to paste this in and I'm going to launch that off and we'll see if this other one, nope, it's still running all the calculations. And so it's calculating trends. And like I said, I could run this in the other models too. I could run it in Gemini, I could run it in Claude to go do the same thing. But the thing is, because I use the non-reasoning model, right? I didn't get a lot of description here. I got a couple of key highlights, of what's going on here. But what you'll see here is if I had turned on reasoning, which I did in the example over here, it actually gives me a lot more description about what's going on there. In fact, if I go load this into Claude, for example, and I use Opus 4.1, it will actually give me a much more detailed, much more reasoned answer about what's going on there. So again, I'll let that run off in the background so we can keep going because I'm cognizant that we've got about 15 minutes left here. Here is another really great use case. In fact, I work with a valuation company to build a small product that actually automates this. So often you may have to, understand what's in people's tax returns, right? And so these tools are fantastic at actually loading up tax returns, analyzing tax returns, and giving you the output in a way that you want it. So I'm going to actually just say, hey, I want to go grab this example here. In fact, I'm going to go actually run this in Google's AI Studio. I'm going to create a new chat here. Make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to go grab these files, right? I've got some tax returns from an organization. It's going to read those tax returns. You see how big these are for a second. I'm going to paste in the text that I wanted to do here. But I basically wanted to read these tax returns and then start creating the line item import. Now, in fact, the product that I created for this company actually turns this into an income statement, a balance sheet. It even does multi-year stuff. But what I want to show you here is just the ability for it to go off and run and just start grabbing this information pretty quickly and synthesizing it in a way that is easy and makes a lot of sense. So here I went back just to the original EBITDA stuff here. You'll see from the thinking model, you'll see here, look, it gives you a lot more detail about what's going on here versus that old auto model. So that's why I go back and I say, I encourage you to use those versions of the tools. Same thing here. If I look at what Claude created now in terms of understanding that PNG, right? It actually gave me a lot of context, a lot of insight about what was happening there. One of the things you can do, I don't have it in the demo, is let's say that I wanted to be able to recreate the numbers in this chart. I could actually tell Claude to create a spreadsheet of me and estimate what it believes each of the numbers are for the line items on that chart. So if you ever had a use case to do that, you can go ahead and go do that too. Let's just see if this is done firing up. No, it's still working through it. So again, we'll keep going here. This is really similar to a couple of these other examples, so I won't go through it, but I want to highlight the fact that, again, I can give it a spreadsheet. Let's say I was doing some discovery and I wanted to go identify anomalous transactions. I can upload a spreadsheet and say, hey, this is a set of transactions from the year 2023, create a summary table by category, right? And you can see, again, Claude does a beautiful job visualizing the output and then go identify any anomalous expenditures. In this case, there was a lot of jewelry in the credit card statements. So I already did this example, so I won't go through this. But again, what I wanted to highlight was if you're using, if you've got video, you can upload easily up to a 60-minute video into Gemini and have it process that video and give you a complete transcript. It can give you the sentiment, the tone, you can find things. It is a super, super powerful tool for doing that. So for the last couple of minutes, I created a bunch of family law examples because I presented at the family law group last time, and I wanted to just highlight a bunch of different ways that you can use these tools. So at this point, I built out hundreds of use cases, but I want to highlight a couple of simple ones that shows you what these tools can do. So let's say you're creating you want to do a declaration build, right? You want it to be, trauma informed and exhibit friendly. What I created for you in here are a bunch of different prompts and use cases to do it. And one of the things that you'll see here is whenever you're creating a prompt for ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you should always give it a role. You are a family law associate, or you are a seasoned litigator, or act as a judge in the Superior Court for Los Angeles County, or act as a juror in this case. If you tell these models to take on a persona or a role, it will do that and it will analyze the content from that point of view, right? So we can say, hey, take the narrative below into a declaration that is chronological, it's got numbered paragraphs, right? Each material assertion references an exhibit, include a short timeline, add a gaps needed as exhibits, and only use the pasted in text and file names. Don't invent facts or citations and flag ambiguities, right? So instead of running all these real time, what I'm going to do is I have pre-created these just to show you these. So if I go into here, this was the declaration builder. And what you'll see here is I literally pasted this role in. And then, by the way, what I told is I said, hey, because it said, all right, hey, give me all those exhibits, because that's what I told it to do, right? It says, hey, go give me all this content, which I don't have in here. So I said, now just go make up the content so I can run this prompt and show you what's in here. So it says, I'm going to fabricate some of the stuff. So it's going to draft declaration. So I, Jane Doe, declare as follows on January 2nd, this, on January 5th, this, key timeline of events, gaps and needed exhibits, right? So the nice thing is you can actually have it go through and do the stuff for you. So if you've got all the content, you can just give it the instructions about what to do. And what you'll almost always see now in the bottom of ChatGPT is it will almost always ask you a follow-up question that says, hey, do you want me to create another version of this, or a version formatted for a court or something else, right? So, excuse me, if I say yes, it will go ahead and do that. I didn't do that in this particular example, but that's something that you can easily do, right? Maybe you want to create a BIF style co-parenting email rewriter, right? You want to have something really simple, right? You want an ultra concise version that's less than 90 words. You want a neutral and solution focused one less than 140, or maybe you want a boundary setting one less than 160, right? And make sure you remove blame, accusations, legal conclusions, keep the dates, times, requests specific, and then paste in their client content. So again, if I go look at this one, if I go back and look at the BIF one, you'll see what it did is it says, okay, and I told it to, again, make up the content, right? So it's saying, all right, I've created an original version here, an original draft, but then it says, all right, I've created version A for you, ultra concise, less than or equal to 90 words, right? So last Friday, pickup was delayed by 30 minutes, which caused confusion for the children. Going forward, please confirm these things, right? Nice, neutral, in a manner that you want, right? Here's one that's less than 140 words. Here's one that's less than equal to 160 words. So again, really simple, really straightforward, and and very powerful. So, and the nice thing is you can, again, and you can say, no, I didn't like these, rewrite these again, do this as many times as you want. It is really, really good at doing these things. Let's say you wanted to create a parent custody and safety note, right? I want to create 3 parenting schedules. And this is one where I think I created an infographic. So let me jump into this one. But you can say, look, I want to give you these different options, right? Option 1 is 223. Option 2 is 2255. Option 3 is week on, week off. Give me the pros and cons, transition times, exchange locations. And by the way, you can build these as projects or custom GPTs, so you don't actually have to remember these. So if you create a lot of these, you can use these, whether you use a project or a custom GPT in ChatGPT, or a gem in Gemini, or a project in Claude. You can have these pre-built and make it, make your life really simple as you're doing these things. So if I go find the parenting time schedules here, right, what it did is it created a set of facts for me. It says, hey, here's an option 1, 2, 2, 3 schedule, right? Parent A Monday through Tuesday, parent B Wednesday, Thursday, alternating weekends, Friday to Saturday. Here are the pros and cons. Here's transitions. Here's locations. Exactly what I asked for, right? Gave me option 3, gave me holiday schedules. And then it said, do you want me to create a clean template? And what you'll notice here is I said, yeah. And the first time it did it, it failed, right? So you will see this, right? These things can occasionally fail. So I said, hey, I want you to go actually create it in HTML and React, right? That first one didn't work. So I want you to create a much more visually beautiful one here. And what you'll see now is these tools, and ChatGPT is good, Gemini is better, and Claude is the best at creating these absolutely gorgeous visualizations on these things. So right, it actually created here, the three different options here. We can print this out. We can save it as a document. But most people don't know that these tools are really, really good at creating things like this now. So, check for consistency in attachments, right? Review the following income and expense declarations. Again, you can tell the tools what you want it to do, right? Go look for internal inconsistencies, go look for missing attachments, right? Look for ambiguous entries. So if I go look at this one, and again, it made it a lot easier having these things all pre-created here. I'm going to go take a look at this one here. And again, I just had it made up the data, but you can say it's got an excerpt here. It's got, made up values for the demonstration. And then it went through the issues table, right? What is the issue? Why it's a problem? What you should do to fix it, right? So it really, really is good there. Hang on. I just have to let my dog out before he takes out my screen. Come on, buddy. Ready? Go. All right. That's the joys of a big dog. But anyways, again, a really, really powerful tool, a really powerful use case for going and doing this. Right? Here's another one when you want to do more complex calculations. If you need to do the more Marsden calculations, right, which is calculating the value of a home that was owned before divorce, right? You can actually say, hey, build the outline from the inputs below. I need the variables, I need the definitions. I want to see a step-by-step formula with placeholders. I'll put a checklist of all the documents needed to populate each variable, right? Don't compute anything unless values are provided. So again, it did an absolutely incredible job of doing this. And again, these tools have been trained on just about everything that's out there. So if I go back to the top here, so it started with, hey, here's all the variables and the definitions. So if people aren't familiar with these, or if you've passed this off to a newer associate, you could say, hey, this is all the things that you need to go focus on, right? Here's the standard terms and conditions and things that we use as part of this, right? Here's the step-by-step formulas with the placeholders. So again, it says, what should we do? When do we acquire things? All these different elements to all these things here. Here's a document checklist. Here's a worksheet that someone could fill out. I mean, I basically told them at the end to basically go use the calculations, the fake ones, to run it just so they could see what it would look like. But you could, again, give somebody a complete example of doing this. But I just wanted to show you that these tools have gotten unbelievable at math. They've gotten unbelievable at formulas and at following rules. And they can do multi-step items with little or no issue. So just a couple more things. I won't go through all these because I know we've just got 3 minutes left. But if you're doing an ex parte checklist and declaration, right, you can go through here and have it run all these things. And again, I will just show you the output of what that looks like. And everybody is going to get all of this content, all the things that you've got here, right? So it went through, and again, I had to make up data, but it says, hey, here's the checklist we want to go through. Here's the notifications that we've got to do. Here's the timing window that we need to focus on. So again, talking points, fact numbers, exhibits. And then I actually had it create a court style declaration that I could use and copy and paste into, whatever my favorite text editor is, whether it's Word or Google Docs or whatever it happens to be. So again, really powerful way of using these tools to do these things. You can do 2-pass self-critiques on a declaration. So let's say you've got a declaration, you want it to go through and do, hey, first critique is give me the 10 most significant weaknesses. Is there ambiguity? Are there missing dates? Are there conclusionary statements? Are there lack of exhibits? Right? And then in the second version, go give me a revised version that addresses those weaknesses, right? And mark the reversions with fixed comments. So if I go look at that one, again, what we'll see here is it says, okay, here's a fake declaration for the exercise, right? Here's my declaration, right? My spouse and I separated sometime in the summer of 2022. We had many fights about money. She was irresponsible with our joint funds. So it says, all right, here's your first critique, right? Here's the ambiguity, right? Sometime in summer 2022 is vague. We need an exact date. Conclusionary statements, right? So then it goes through and it offers to fix those things for me, right? So then it says, here's the exact data on it. So again, use these tools as collaborators. They are really, really powerful there. If you have a ton of content, I won't go through these because we're basically at time here. You can go through and you can get thousands of texts if you have them. You can put them in timeline sequence. You can have them cluster things. You can have it create exhibits for you. And that's really it. So I just want to hit 2 more things. The first thing I want to highlight is, look, these models have gotten unbelievably advanced this year. These reasoning models are absolutely incredible in what they can do. I encourage everyone to use the reasoning models. You get way better results. They're all becoming multimodal, but the only one that really understands all that today is Google's Gemini. Um, don't use the commercial LLMs to find cases. So you see it all the time. Someone went to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini and said, hey, find me a case that supports these things. Please, please, please don't do that. Only use, the commercial tools that you can pay for that, that have all the history of all the cases and things like that. Hallucination rates are gone down, but they're not zero, right? And then the last thing I'll just mention is if you're looking for help, this is how I work with firms. I do a much more expanded version of this workshop, right? I typically do 2 to 2.5 hours of, hey, let me really take you through how you can use these tools. What do your workflows look like? Things like that. I do all day training sessions for organizations to really get your people up to speed so they know how to do these things. I build custom agents and I offer effectively AI on demand for people that want retainers and assistants in using these AI tools just to be as productive as they can. So lastly, I've got all my contact information on here, and I do publish a newsletter several times a week with just the latest information around AI. It is switching to be much more legal specific. It's been very general. So if you are interested in signing up, it's completely free. Feel free to do that. So with that, I know we're at the end of the hour, and I will go back and I will stop sharing and just see if there are any questions from the group.
So, yes, Stefan, we actually have quite a few questions. I can generalize them for you in the interest of time. So, a lot of the questions we're receiving is basically you showed a wide array of tools, but do you have them ranked on which ones are best for certain activities? Like maybe Claude is better for writing, Gemini calculations, or maybe ChatGPT reasoning? Do you have kind of like a chart for that?
So I don't have a chart in here for it. I mean, I'll talk verbally about it for a second. So Claude has, I mean, so historically, Claude has definitely been the best writer. So like if Claude is a 10 out of 10 in writing, right? The other tools have gotten remarkably good with the most recent updates. Gemini and ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT up until version 5 was probably a 6 out of 10, to be perfectly honest. It's now a solid 9 to a 9.5, but only if you use the thinking model. If you use the auto model, it still writes like a robot. So you only get their best thinking in the thinking model or the best writing in the thinking model. Gemini also has become a very, very good writer, a very, very good reasoner in that stuff. So they're very similar. When I turn to analytics, to be perfectly honest, if I'm dealing with a lot of spreadsheets, I typically work with ChatGPT if I only have a handful of spreadsheets, because it's really good at calling Python tools and doing analysis and fixing data. If I have a lot of documents, though, I'll use Gemini because the context window is so large. And Claude has probably the smallest amount of files you can upload. So again, for writing, I used to exclusively use Claude. I use ChatGPT 5 thinking and Gemini quite a bit now, almost as often as Claude. But in reasoning, if you're using GPT-5 thinking, it's now as good as Claude 4.1 extended thinking and Gemini 5 2.0. So they're all coming close together. But again, multimodal, the only tool you can really use at this point is Gemini.
Great. And then in regards to privileged information concerns, some of our viewers are a bit confused about that aspect. They want to know why it's not important to be trained on AI if they're already putting in information that's been redacted for sensitive information.
Sorry, can you reframe that?
So, in regards to the privacy concerns with some of the
Yeah.
models not natively redacting that information from their
Mhm.
training, some of the members want to know if that should still be a concern if they're putting in information that's already been scrubbed of sensitive information, basically.
So that's why I said at the beginning, first of all, only use the paid models and only use the ones where you've turned off privacy. Even if you've redacted the stuff, you don't want those cases getting out there if there's a potential chance for it to train in your data. So that's why that whole upfront piece about like how to switch Claude, how to switch ChatGPT, everything is so important. I mean, I really encourage firms to use either the Teams tools or the enterprise tools. That way you have the most advanced security and it will never train on your data. But if you're a small practitioner and if you are going to, use the consumer ones, which like I use, I know a lot of people do, please, please, please turn off that data, turn off the training, even if you've redacted the stuff. You just don't want it showing up out there.
All right. And then if you had to pick just one AI for the best option overall for a lawyer, which one would you recommend if you had to pick one?
It's hard to answer it on a call like this, to be honest, because it depends on what infrastructure they're using. I mean, for example, if one of the firms I presented to recently was already using Google Workspace, right, for all their email, for all their document management, things like that. So it made perfect sense for them to use Gemini. For someone that's a Microsoft shop, they might want to be using either ChatGPT or Claude. So, but it really depends on the kind of cases you work on. So I'm happy to talk to people, kind of one-on-one if you want to have that discussion. I mean, and I hate to like weasel out of the answer, but there isn't a single answer that I can generically give for everybody because everybody's needs are a little bit different. And as I've done these, I found that most people pick two tools, not one, to be perfectly honest. They find that they get the best results using two, and they often go back and forth. Very few people use three or four, but that's kind of how I would have to answer it because there's not a single answer, and they continue to evolve. Also, they keep getting better and better as they go forward.
Great. And then let's see. Somebody said that their firm has a subscription to Copilot and that they're told it's the same as ChatGPT. So they're curious if it really is the same and does it have the same features as ChatGPT 5.0.
So you'll notice that I did not talk about Copilot on here. Microsoft has, for whatever reason, effectively lobotomized Copilot in their version of, for the version of ChatGPT that they use, right? You're basically getting ChatGPT 5 Auto, and you can't, for example, access the same level of thinking all the time. There is no version of ChatGPT 5 Pro. So I know that people have talked about that. I have not had a single client in the end that has ended up using Copilot for that exact reason. Every firm I've talked to has realized that it's just not as good, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't have all the same features. I don't know why Microsoft has done it that way, but I, in good faith, as I, advise clients, cannot recommend it.
Right. And then let's see. Do you have any thoughts on the tools you covered today versus ones such as Lexis AI Protege and Westlaw Co-Counsel?
Yeah, no, I don't. I purposely don't typically compare those in here because they serve different needs typically, right? These are general large language models that are very specific and can do a ton of different things. The legal specific ones, obviously, they're very focused on cases and other things. And so I don't compare and contrast them. I mean, I've done a lot of research around what those tools can do, but I typically don't cover that in here. I do that more as bespoke work for people. So they're very different. I mean, the kind of analytics and things you can do, the image generation, the infographics, the ability to process a video, the ability to combine multiple spreadsheets and extract out insights, you can't get those from a lot of those other tools that are out there. They're very, very specific for, analyzing cases and drafting briefs and things like that.
Great. Let's see. I believe, let's see. In regards to that financial statement case use that you went over,
Mhm.
would it be possible to ask it to evaluate financial statements with other supporting documents and ask it to look for fraud?
Absolutely. Yeah. You might have to define like how you really want to determine fraud. I mean, you could start by that. I mean, like I will tell you, I worked with a very large valuation company in the East Coast, and we've actually had it reconstructing, it looks at their final reports, it looks at all the inputs, all the financial statements, all the outside research and all the data, right? It combines to actually fact check everything that's in there. In fact, I didn't actually show an example of the fact checking that I've got. I've actually built, and if people reach out, I'm happy to share it. I have a detailed fact checker that it literally goes through and I'll say, fact check this article, right? You can see the results here. It will go through, if you give it something, it will go through every single fact in a document, right? And identify, are these, I mean, and I don't have to tell it the facts. It reads sentence by sentence. It says, okay, let me go find everything that's in there. And it says, how accurate is this? Is it partially accurate? Is it not accurate at all, right? What are the sources it does? So you can do the same thing from a financial standpoint. You could upload some spreadsheets and some supporting data and say, hey, how good is this, right? Is there issues, that don't seem correct here and potentially fraudulent? So it could certainly take a pass at it, but you might have to just be a little more specific about what does fraud mean in the case that you're looking for. But I would certainly try it 100%.
All right, and then we'll end on this question. So,
Sure.
this attendee noticed that you asked specific questions using terms like extract and assistant. Are those terms critical? Can similar terms be used to get the same result? If specific terms are needed, is there a place to find those terms?
No, you don't have to be that specific. You can say, pull all the data out of this spreadsheet, or extract the data, or hey, go read this spreadsheet and create a summarized table for me. These tools, the one thing that's amazing about them is they are really, really good at understanding what you're trying to say, even when you have typos. I mean, I often don't even fix typos anymore because it really knows what you're trying to do. So yeah, no, there isn't a specific set of terms. The one thing I would say is, if I go back to these examples, let me go back to one up here. If I had one, just like when you talk about like the prompt, like I said, the role, the task, and then any rules, kind of guidelines, the more specificity you can give these tools, just the better, higher quality output you're going to get out of these things, right? So most of the prompts that I give, most of the prompts I give are very, very lengthy, right? I tell it all the things I want to do. I tell it all the analysis I want to happen. If there are constraints about timing, I give it that. I tell it what role I want it to be, because again, it just saves me having 4 or 5 chats when I can have one chat to get to the answer that I want. So there aren't, you'll learn over time as you use them. There's, yeah, I'm sure there are some words that make it a little bit better, but there is definitely not a set of industry specific terms that make it, that you get higher quality output from.
All right, and I believe that about wraps up Q&A.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time today. The presentation was fantastic, and I hope our attendees enjoy the rest of their afternoon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.